Today on The Riff, Jeremy and Justin set some boundaries. Well, at least they talk about boundaries. We hope today is helpful and hopeful. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to another episode of The Riff. I'm Jeremy and our co-host here.
Hey, I'm Justin.
And we're glad to have you here wherever you're joining us, however you're joining us. Where do you think I get that line from?
I don't know.
Colin Cowherd.
Is it really?
Yeah. You ever listen to Sports Talk Radio?
I never listen to Sports Talk Radio. Can't stand it.
Why?
I know. I don't know.
Why? Is there? It sounds like. Let's unpack that. Is there?
Well, I go back and forth with Stephen A. I don't like him.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I like this guy. And then I don't like him. And then I'm like, I like this guy.
Is it centered around LeBron? Is that your deal?
I don't know. He just gets so mad at things.
Yeah.
So then I'm like,
just paid a lot of money to.
So then I'm like, man, I'm just watching people talk about sports.
Yeah.
And there's something about it in my brain where I'm like, I think they're making stuff up at this point. Because it's on ESPN like, I don't know, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
So like, there's only so much you can talk about.
Yeah. I have sports talk radio as my default. And it's just one of those things that my family makes fun of me because when they're in the car with me, they always comment at how it's never about sports on Sports Talk Radio. And but sometimes it is.
I think I'm with them.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my issue.
That's your issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for pinpointing it.
Well, all that to say is Colin always says this on a show. Wherever you're listening, however you're listening, welcome to the herd.
And that is Colin.
Yeah,
it's so Colin.
But welcome to the Riff. And Justin, I would say we successfully just throw away the first 2 minutes of every episode with just banter.
I'd say so. I'd say most of the time you could just start at minute 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, here's almost minute 2. Hold on. And
yeah.
Welcome to the Riff.
So glad to have you.
Good.
Okay, so today what we're going to talk about, something that I think we all deal with. It's how to deal with difficult people. What do we do with difficult people? And I just want to apologize in advance if you had somebody in your sphere of influence who sent you the Riff and said, I think you need to listen to this. That's super passive aggressive. But no matter how you got this, we're glad you did. And let's walk through it because we all have difficult people. Justin,
yes.
Do you have someone in mind when I say difficult person that you work with?
No,
you can't. You can't say me.
I
okay,
know it's not you.
But can you picture someone?
I can picture someone.
Family, friend.
Yeah. Speaks a lot.
Yeah.
Just like Okay. Kind of motivational when he does speak. Inspiring, I would say, but
Okay.
So not you. It's not you. It's not you, man. It's not you.
Oh, we're going to talk about that. So we all have somebody in our life. So one of the things that I think is important is the fact that we define who are the people that have influence in our lives, I don't know the term, over our lives and whatnot. So here, let me just start with a question I'll throw out to you. How important is it that the people in your world think and align with your worldview?
Great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I feel like, I feel like you have to have both inside of your sphere. I think that you have to have people that are aligned. So I would say my closest relationship, Jamie, would be I would say we have the same worldview.
Did you say Jamie or
Jamie?
Jamie. Okay.
Jamie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I thought you said Jeremy.
No, Jamie. Yeah, J-A-M-I. No E on the end. So yes, same worldview.
Yeah.
At our table, we definitely want people with differing worldviews, and not to change ours, but to broaden ours. Okay. So when I say at our table, we hope to have at least connection with people that have a different worldview than ours. We don't want to be in a bubble, but we also don't want to be in a space where it's like, whatever, man, whatever. There is a balance to that element that I think that we have strived for. Here's interesting. I don't even know if this is on topic. It's kind of on topic, but Jamie played a game yesterday with the girls. It was fascinating. And it was about who is in your sphere. So it's exactly
really?
Yeah. So who is in your sphere? She was listening to a podcast and they were walking through the difference between females and males when they create community. and they create who surrounds them like intimately, right? So the podcast said that females are much better connectors, shocker, and that if you ask the children of the mother, they'll be able to name at least 3 friends right off the top of their head.
Of their mom.
Of their mom.
Okay.
And then the same space, you ask, now name 3 of dad's friends. And there's always a pause, and there's always laughter. So she played the game last night while we were at dinner.
Yeah.
And she was like, all right, name 3 of mom's friends. And it was like, choo-choo, choo-choo, choo-choo. Just quick. That's so cool. It's like, okay, name 3 of dad's friends. It was just eating food, silence. And then Ella goes, Chad. And I'm like, the guy that works at Dunkin' Donuts? He does. And she's like, yeah, Chad. Chad would be your friend. He's one of them. I'm like, okay. And Lily's like, you work with Jeremy? I'm like, yeah, I do. And then they're like, I think that's it. Oh, what? Okay, yeah, no. So it's really interesting.
Funny.
So even just from the viewpoint of a kiddo, like, yeah, it's interesting to see who you surround yourself with. So I like to think I'm very broad and very like, I have so many people, but I'm probably actually pretty blinded by a lot of things. So yeah, that was a really long answer to your short question.
Well, I would just say to be mentioned
Do we have time for
in the same breath as Chad.
I know.
I feel good. I feel good.
Nathan Mathis made the list as well.
Okay.
Because I hug him every time we go to the Dream Center. So
well, then that means he's got a lot more hugs than I have.
That's
from
true.
him. So,
do we have time for the rest of the riff, or is that it?
We'll see. We'll see.
Okay. What about you?
Some bonus episode.
What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So, I would say growing up, and I'm not blaming or even putting this on like my parents. And I think that I'm putting this on the church culture that I grew up, but it might have been my interpretation of it for all I know. So grace given there. But growing up, there was this really strong emphasis that I interpreted of come out from among them and be ye separate vibe from 1 Peter is the challenge of to Christians is if you're a follower of Jesus, what good does light have? What fellowship does light have with darkness? Vibe that you should be surrounded by Christian people. And so what happens in that culture, and that was it's really kind of what creates a Christian culture. And so like I tease about it, but we really would have Christian versions of everything else. So if there's city league softball, if there's city leagues for softball, we would have church leagues. There's no less fights. There's just a church name instead of a business name on the uniform, like for real. And instead of roller skating with secular music, there would be Christian skate nights. And so almost everything, even amusement parks was kind of a thing at those times, and that kind of got into some legal trouble over a heritage family, amusement parks. But bottom line is this mentality started to be developed is Christians should not only get together to be encouraged and to grow in their faith, they should do all things together. And by default, that meant I'm so busy, I don't have any time. Or it could be an intentional, I don't want anyone else who has a different worldview into my sphere. And so I definitely look back and as then you get to the age where you start crafting, what's my interpretation of scripture is that's not it. I want to be able to be, I want to be able to have a lot of engagement with a lot of people. And I have some very valuable friends in my life who don't share a lot of things with me, whether it could be a faith issue. One of my very best friends, we do not he does not believe that Jesus is God's son. He is not a follower of Jesus, and he's one of my closest friends in life. And he would say the same about me. And so while most of my friends do share theological or faith value, not all of them, it's not a prereq. And then when it comes to even who's going to have an impact on my kids, a lot of them share faith values, but the ones who are going to be closest to kids, the biggest prereq is that they share the safety values that I'm trying to create for my kids when they're growing up. So I'm not going to send them off to an environment where someone else is in control of their safety that I'm not confident in. And so basically, I've got lots of people. We don't share everything, but I also want to be intentional, just like you said, to understand what we don't share. Is that a deal breaker for us to have connection? Or am I trying to shape something or guard something very specific that might impact how close someone gets to the circle? But when it comes to family, do family get a pass? Like if a family member doesn't share something, you're family. Like your blood, right? So does a family member get a pass to be able to have access to your life? What does that look like?
Yes and no. I think that a couple of really helpful resources would be Boundaries, the book.
Henry Cloud.
And then there's also a follow-up, which I found even more helpful from that, which is Necessary Endings. He wrote that as well. And it talks about that. It talks about like family elements that might have to come to an end because of a toxicity that's present within that space.
Yeah.
So just because you're family, you don't get a pass, at least in our family. That sounds horrible. That's not a motto on our wall. So just to let you know.
It's on your Christmas card.
That's our... But we understand, like, we're going to have boundaries set.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that we, exactly what you're saying, create a net of safety for the girls specifically. Like, just because you're Uncle Dave doesn't mean you get to X, Y, and Z just because you're family. Like, we're going to have boundaries. You're not our immediate family. So we definitely have those. We even have those set up with our parents and with in-laws and situations to where if they live very close or far away, like there's so many things that have to be. The important part of boundaries for me is identifying and putting language to it.
Right.
That's really it. Because then when you know the lines, you can then talk about the lines. But I think that we get into a huge situation when it's just kind of this whole like, no, we'll set a boundary. Yeah, we'll get, and the boundary is set when you're in like a high tension space, which is never the time to set the boundary because you're in an emotional state where you're like, oh, he's out. Yeah. Just hang on. Let's talk about this. So I don't think that you get a free pass just because you're family. I think that you get a special consideration because you're family. I do.
Yeah,
I think that there needs to be a very deep talk and conversation, but not necessarily that's Brother Jimmy. He's just, he's just Jim. It's like, no, that's not it. So what about you and your family and what that's looked like, how you guys have set boundaries?
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying, if someone were to say, hey, because you're family, that trumps our values. You just have access, that we're all just a community here. Now you have access. That's when abuse happens. Sexual abuse happens. Mm-hmm. That's when mental, verbal, just damage happens. And so we all have people in our life that we are going to spend holidays with naturally that don't share our values. And so for me, it's fun. I'm fine with that. And it could be a great exercise in human observation. But when there's something that goes against a value that is dangerous to the mind, to the body, to the values, then I think you have to say something. For example, let's pick on something that is a classic 1980s holiness church deal: alcohol. Okay, so some of the teaching would be you can't drink at all, like it's total abstinence from drinking. And so then some people would take that boundary and say, hey, if I'm going to an event and any one person is drinking there, then we're out. Okay. Now, when it comes to safety, if you're an alcoholic and that's going to be a trigger for you, that might be a great boundary for you. But if it's because that's your definition of holiness, and holiness is not only am I going to live out my personal conviction, and maybe that conviction is they're not going to drink, but now I don't want to be associated with someone who doesn't share my conviction, I think that's legalism, and that's an unnecessary boundary. Now, if I'm going to go to a party, a family gathering, and there are some who don't share my values and their behavior now begins to impact me or those I love, then that's going to be a boundary issue, not because of what they're choosing, but because of how it's impacting. So if someone were to say something, like a grandpa were to say something that's racist, right? Instead of saying, oh, that's just grandpa kids, sometimes you don't want to embarrass and shame if it's not a value bomb, but if it's kind of a borderline issue, you might feel like, where's a dignified way to talk about this? But there will be times where you might have to say, hey, man, that really bothers me that you would say that. That's a really harmful thing to say. We 100% don't agree with that. And if that continues, then you have to make the choice. Do I want to expose us to this kind of conversation? Or, so there are times where you have to communicate these boundaries. But then here's where I really think is helpful. Pre-1990s, most people didn't have boundaries. And it gives, when you don't have boundaries, whoever is the most bold or brazen gets to do their whatever they want to do. And it gives power to the powerful. And that could be bad when someone's got a bad motive. Since like the early 2000s, people like Henry Cloud, some people have taken these very helpful boundaries and now they're throwing boundaries in areas that don't need to be boundaries. They're putting up fences in areas. And so I think what we have to do is identify what's a preference and what's a value. And what is the difference there? How do we determine that? Because there are some people who are getting slapped boundaries on them that they're like, is it, how do I slap a boundary with my parents now that, they're grandparents and what's a preference? Is it they give my kids ice cream and I don't want to? What do I do with that? Because those are some real issues. Some people now, their first thing is just throw boundaries. And then, but how do we determine when it's a boundary and when it's a preference issue?
I think that one of the things that we've walked through with boundaries and values and preferences would be to look at a value being something that actually forms you or forms your child. A preference is something that you like, you don't like, right? So when you talk even about the word identity, that means repeated beingness. That is an over and over and over process of being. That would be value driven. So if I've got somebody in my home that is hanging with my kids, that might be in my family, might not, and we are continually doing something or talking about something that forms or shapes us in a way that I don't either agree with or hope to go, that would be a boundary situation where we have to draw very, very hard lines where it's like, listen, if it's a situation where they come over and they say something where I'm like, I don't agree with that. Okay, it's a one-time thing. I'm going to talk with my kids about it. It's actually an opportunity because we get to see something different. It's actually a gift, right? Now, it's a preference, but if that continues and is a repeated thing, it becomes a value issue for us. To where it's like, okay, well, we've talked about it. We've explored it. We said we don't agree with it. We said, or something that we don't like talking about, especially if it's like taking your like idea of a comment of it that's racist. Yeah. Where it's like, that's not going to be in our home. Right. Like that will not be part of us. It's not cool. Yeah. So for us, that's kind of how we have defined a value and a preference. And when a preference becomes a value is when that becomes repeated beingness or the identity portion of all of that. So what about how do you look at that? Your girls are now. Yeah, now they're out, they're independent, they're rolling. Yeah. So what did that look like as you kind of formed that through your home? I mean, obviously, the younger they are, the more responsible I am to protect them for age and stage appropriate. And part of that season is you're learning, as they're learning to make decisions, you're not chucking a billion of them at them. And so we're trying to pace their decision and reasoning to a pace that they understand and they can handle. And so sometimes it's avoiding situations. For example, you don't take them to, let's say you work at a business that has a work party in Vegas every Christmas and it's a crazy environment. You don't take your 7-year-olds there and say, hey, you're going to have to figure this out sooner or later. This is what the world looks like. So you don't
expose unnecessarily and prematurely. So you build so that when they face natural opportunities to make decisions and values, they have a good upbringing. So the younger they are, the more sheltered they are. But at the same time, our vision was never, we're going to shelter them like they're 2 until they're 18 and then send them off to make decisions for the first time ever. I wanted them, it's kind of like helping them drive a car, I wanted them to learn how to drive the car way before they went to college and into Seattle or Orlando is where they went to college. Like, I don't want them driving on the highway in busy, traffic in Orlando to be the first time they're making car decisions. I want to be the one that's like, hey, let's evaluate that decision when you made that turn there when they're 15 and I'm there with them, and 16 and 17 and 18. And as they get more and more freedom, then they get more and more leash there. So all that to say is, when it comes to family or access, we've had times growing up where we've had to have boundaries on someone who meant a lot to our family. They weren't family, but they kind of played a role when we didn't live by parents as grandparents-ish. And there was a season where it was such a gift that they would watch our girls all the time. They would help out. They would prematurely understand our church schedule and schedule their days off accordingly. So it was really cool. Great people. The challenge came when it became really weirdly possessive for a season where we would say, hey, we're going to go ahead and pick up the girls at this time. They say, no, we're going to go ahead and, it's just like stuff that you're like, that's odd, right? And so we had to make a decision. So we would say, hey, no, we're going to go ahead and do this. We're the parents. It got to the spot where we really had to ruin the relationship because we're thinking, okay, either this is unsafe or this is weird. And either way, we're gonna be in charge of our family here. We're gonna make a decision for them. And so we had to have very awkward conversations to say, hey, if we can't have predictable conversations where we're that this is helping our family, then there's a lot of red flags for us. And so we value relationships with people who are different, but not higher than the values we're trying to create. And most of the times they don't conflict.
Yeah.
Most of the times they make it more interesting. But never expose. And same thing with my marriage with Leanne. Like, I don't track Leanne and be like, okay, who's she talking to? I want to read every one of her emails for the last 5 years, like, because I trust her.
You don't do that?
Well, bad example. I do. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. No.
No, I don't. So it's not like. So we have a ton of trust. At the same time, if there was someone who's unsafe and had unsafe motives, it's silly of me not to work with her and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Let's have a conversation. Let's draw a boundary here. And it has nothing to do with a lack of trust. And it has nothing to do with you will never interact with somebody. It's not control. It's saying, hey, is there a danger to a value we have? Let's have this conversation. And if we identify this is dangerous to a value we have, then it doesn't matter who you offend. So, but there's a verse I wanted to read. It's in Ephesians chapter 4. And so I had it, I brought it up on the phone. It says this: be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And what I like about this is Paul is saying, I think this is Hebrews, so I don't mean to interject. Or no, that is Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2.
Who wrote Hebrews?
I don't know. I hope it's Priscilla.
I was going to say, people say it's a woman.
I know. In the day they didn't want to name it. So I hope so, just to be able to say that's cool. But I have no idea. But Paul says in Ephesians, he says, bear with one another. I love it. As long as you can, go for it. And so there should be some people, when we're healthy, that we don't prefer to be around, but part of our Christian community, part of our family responsibility is to bear with each other. And so what we shouldn't do is assume if I don't like you or if I'm not comfortable with you, then I'm just going to slap a boundary at you. I should stop and recognize, is this a preference? If it's a preference, bear with them as long as you can. If it's a boundary, evaluate the boundary. Should that boundary be there? Is that boundary legalism or is that boundary safety? And if it's a boundary of safety of something that is important to you, then have the conversations. So how do you have the conversation? You identify it's a boundary. How do you give people what's the most dignified way to do it?
Clear, kind.
Yeah.
Clear. Like that's it. Just very clear.
Yeah.
And we talked about this too. And I'm learning a lot on this because when I get into situations that are tense, I usually spin and try to make it a much better situation than it really is.
Yeah, I do the same.
Being clear is being kind.
Yeah.
So I think that's what is the boundary? How was it crossed? What are we doing now?
Okay.
That's
I like
just
that.
the three.
Here's the boundary.
Here's the boundary. How was it crossed?
Yeah.
What are we doing now?
Yeah.
That's it. Those three pieces are the pieces that you want to walk through. And sometimes when you like reading Cloud, sometimes the end of it is a necessary ending.
Yeah.
It is.
And that is because they refuse to change.
A, refuse to change. B, it's a toxic situation where it harms either you or the other person involved. Or it's a situation that's differing than like a familial situation. So he talks a lot about even work and talks about how the motto, we're just a family here at work, is very, very difficult for people because if they've grown up in a family that's very tight knit and has very strong belief in core value pieces, it's like, well, we're a family. Why would you fire me? Why would you get mad at me? Why would you move me in this position? Whoa, what are you doing? We're a family. It's a job.
Yeah.
It's a team. That's what it is. It's not a family. So there's even different elements. I want to ask you on that. Like how have you gotten to spaces to where it has had to be a boundary that's really set you apart from someone, whether it be in a family situation or a work situation? How have you handled those? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think for me, very similar natural struggle is I want to be kind more than I want to be clear. I'm so nervous I won't be kind that I risk not being clear. And so growing to become clear, trusting that my natural concern is going to probably land at kind if I'm clear. And now some of you, it's the opposite, right? But so for me, what happens then is I will lean into, in a work setting, I could lean into, I really want you to still be pastored well in this moment. But sometimes this isn't a pastor conversation of I'm your devotional inspiration. This is a work conversation. This is a spending conversation. And I need to be able to let you decide how you want to view me as a pastor, because I need you to really clearly view this expectation as an employee. And so that could be a boundary issue that gets fuzzy. Now, I've never been one who's like, hey, I can't hang with people who I work with. And some people are like that. You don't hang with people you work with because I have those kind of clear boundaries. I've not drawn that line. Clearly, I'm one of your two friends. You and
Chad. I know, man. I know.
But at the same time, it does complicate it, and it just forces me to be clear when I have to have a real work conversation. There's been times where, if it's like a family situation or just a personal situation, I have to have a boundary to be able to say, hey, here's the deal. What you're doing here, that doesn't fly with me. We're not comfortable with that. So here's what we're going to do. I try and not use to say, I think this is what we're going to do, or we're thinking of this, because those could be threats or those could be weak. And so I say, this is what we're going to do. This is what we feel. This is what I see. This is what I feel. This is what we're going to do, right? And then if they frustrate, say, "Hey, I get that might come across confusing. I'm sorry that that's confusing, but this is what we're going to do." So try and just guard that. But I haven't had to use that very often. That's only when I feel like, hey, it's a safety situation, or this is really, really frustrating to the mind. And then I always have to say, if there's nobody around me in my circle that's annoying me or hard to work with, that means that I'm probably throwing too many boundaries when I should be just recognizing preferences. I want to be able to bear with each other and be gentle with each other. I also want to guard the values that are important to me. I mean, it's the same thing financially. Like, I'm not going to, if someone's going to steal my credit card, I ain't going to be around me again, right? And it's fine. It's easy when it comes comes to money, but when it comes to our peace, if someone's stealing your peace, one, quit leaving it out for them. But if they're going to come hunting for your peace and pickpocket your peace, then they don't need to ever have access. So I think those are the questions. Is who's someone in your life right now that is robbing you of peace? And this isn't a witch hunt of saying, okay, just ask yourself, why does that bug you? Is it a preference still? Is it frustrating? What do you do about it? What conversation, what clear conversation do you need to have to give them the chance to stay in their lane? And if they choose not to, I guess you know. So, boundaries.
We have a boundary of around 30 minutes.
Around 30. And we're, that's not super clear though.
It's a blurry boundary.
But boy, is it kind.
That is kind.
It gives us grace. So, hey, thanks for listening, Riff. Honestly, I pray that God would use you. We want to be, as followers of Jesus, we want to be the kind of people who give people the best shot, that we're gracious, but we're not weak, right? And that's that meekness we talked about a little while ago, that we would have a power of God to be able to hold tight to the things that are important to us, guard the people that we love the most, but not end up living in a very legalistic bubble, but also have a life-giving environment that draws others, that benefits others, but is safe for you and for those you love the most. So boundaries and preferences. All right, Justin, we're going to do another Riff. Was this the last episode of the Riff
This
where we're
was
recording?
the last episode of the Riff for this week.
For this week.
Yeah,
So
we'll
next
do
Monday?
I'll do another one. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Riff. We'll have a brand new episode every week, wherever you find podcasts.